All right. Hi, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started because we don't have too much time for our discussion today, but I just wanted to begin by welcoming you all. Thank you for being here and welcome to the International Journal of Islamic Architecture's fourth annual dialogue session. I am Daniel Kozlet, your host for today. I'm an assistant professor of architecture here at Drexel University in Philadelphia in the US, and I am a scholar of colonial and post-colonial North Africa. I'm also an associate editor at the International Journal of Islamic Architecture, or IJIA. It's a pleasure to see so many of you here with us for this thematic conversation on colonial heritage in the post-colonial world. Today, we have three guests to discuss this important topic coming to us from Egypt, Tunisia, and Morocco in what should be a great conversation. I'd like to begin by very briefly introducing the journal and the discussion theme here just in a few words. The International Journal of Islamic Architecture is an academic journal that publishes peer-reviewed articles on architecture, landscape architecture, historic preservation, and urban design, as well as urban planning from all chronologies up to and including the 21st century. Inclusive and interdisciplinary, the journal emphasizes the detailed analysis of the practical, historical, and theoretical aspects of global built environments. We publish work that traverses geographic, temporal, and disciplinary divides, revealing the profound diversity of architectural cultures and practices, all of which we premise on a very broad definition of Islamic architecture, that is spiritual, secular, infrastructural, and ephemeral. So if you out there listening or someone you know is an academic or a practitioner who works on any of these topics, we'd welcome email from you. You can find contact information for us on the journal's website. We are happy to receive manuscripts for consideration. So please do reach out to the journal using the address on the website, which I will place. It's in the email and your registration information. I put it in the chat, but it looks like you won't see it if I do that. So that said, let's go ahead and briefly discuss the theme. So as many of you out there will, of course, know, remnants of 19th and 20th century European colonialism dot the streetscape of cities throughout the post-colonial world. Tangible links to the past, these historic built environments often play a vital role in the function and identity of the contemporary post-colony. Within the Islamic world, and of course beyond that, as globally, such buildings may include government offices, religious structures, schools, and other forms of infrastructure that often stand out amidst examples of more recognized, quote, traditional cultural heritage. Few would disagree, I believe, that historic urban centers and Islamic architectural landmarks warrant protection. But colonial era, that is 19th and 20th century or modern built environments, are somewhat different. They are subject to different interpretations and conservation standards globally. So rather than debating the substantial injustices of colonialism in the past, today we're here to consider the present. What now? So we'll be addressing colonial and post-colonial North Africa, most of which was occupied by France and Great Britain, but also Italy and Spain. There, as elsewhere around the world, European colonial powers undertook building projects large and small. Many of these structures and monuments were demolished following independence, but many were also abandoned, converted, appropriated, and conserved due to necessity. So what do these inherited colonial era artifacts mean now? And how have they been contested, conserved, interpreted, and put to use since the advent of independence? What lessons can be learned from them, and what challenges come with preserving them, these products of such difficult histories in today's globalizing context? Joining us to consider these questions today are three very generous people with their time who are here. We have Leila Ben-Ghassem, Ala Al-Habashi, and Labib Al-Mumni. We're thrilled to have them and look forward to hearing their thoughts and experiences from their work across North Africa. So let me just share brief bios and then we will jump in. So Leila Ben-Ghassem is a social entrepreneur based in Tunis. She is the general manager of Tunis Historique and has founded several cultural heritage organizations, including Dar al-Hakra, Dar Ben Gassem, and Bluefish. She's co-founder and president of Medinti, the Tunis Medina's first economic interest group. Prior to her work in cultural management, Leila held positions in multinational corporations and earned a BS degree in biomedical engineering. Alaa Al-Habashi is a Cairo-based professor of architecture and heritage conservation at Manufia University. His research and practices embrace the specificities of local identities and traditions in historic built environments. He's completed conservation projects in Egypt and elsewhere in the Arab world, and has assisted with registering, managing, and evaluating sites for the UNESCO World Heritage List. And last but not least, Labib Al-Moumni is an architect based in Casablanca. He is the founder of MAMA, an association that aims to highlight and preserve Morocco's modern architectural and urban heritage, and is a doctoral candidate at ETH Zurich. Having published several works on modern Moroccan architecture, Al-Moumni's research explores the use of Moroccan urban design by the independent state in its nation-building project. So welcome to the three of you, and thanks again for being here. So we hope that this session will be a conversation. I had a little bit of script there, but we have not scripted this conversation. Generally speaking, I've shared a few questions. You see some of them on the screen there just to get people thinking and to sort of give everyone a starting point. I've asked each of our three presenters just to begin with about 3 or 4 minutes of initial comments and reflections on the general topic, just to set the stage. And then we'll jump into a conversation, questions and responses among the four of us. We will leave some time at the end for questions from the audience. So for those of you out there, please submit your questions using the Q&A feature, the question and answer feature here on Zoom. We'll do our best to address whatever we can, and the questions we can't address, we'll share amongst ourselves just to make sure that everyone is being heard. So we will do that at about 1 o'clock, I think, stop and open the questions up. So all of that being said, thank you so much for listening to me. Let's go ahead and begin. We'll start with Leila, please.
Thank you for the invitation, Daniel. When I think colonial built heritage in Tunis, always Bab Har comes to mind, which is the poster just behind you. It's it's the gate to the Medina of Tunis. It's one of the gates. It's called Bab Har in Arabic, the port to the sea. In French, it's called Port de France. So, so it's as if we don't want to upset anyone. So if you have a map in Arabic, it's called Bab Har, and if you have a map in French, it's called Port de France. And I think the space, Port de France, the whole space is magical because that's the border between the Medina and the colonial Tunis. So you're walking in this Medina with the narrow streets, with the crowded souks, and then suddenly you come out to this urban explosion, and everybody's passing by without even noticing. And I think it's magical. Every time I'm there, I have to stop and absorb the big cultural change in urban structure between the Medina and the new colonialness with theater pavement, and I think that the best shift in you feel the cultural difference because the trees and the birds are in public spaces in colonial Tunis, urban Tunis, and then in the Medina, the birds are in the courtyards. So there's a different meaning to public space, where people meet and interact. In the Medina, it's almost always in the courtyards, and then when you move out, it's the birds and the trees and the interaction happen in the public space. And I think it's fascinating how both are sitting together in harmony. And there's a lot of urban empathy in this context. We have, of course, a lot of built urban heritage from colonial period, and it's, you know, with every stage of history. What you call heritage and what you want to preserve as heritage changes. So during French occupation, they focused on heritage, on the Roman heritage. And then after independence, the colonial heritage was not really heritage. And now in post-revolution Tunisia, there's a lot of activism in preserving the colonial built heritage. And in fact, this activism has gotten some buildings listed. But listing them is also a big challenge, because now they are financially challenging to restore, technically challenging to maintain, and also financially, you can imagine. But also the challenge is also finding the techniques. I think in Tunisia, despite the wealth of built heritage, there aren't as many generation architects, building craftsmanship schools are closing down. And a lot of the very good craftsmen are learning when they find working opportunities, and they are freelance. So people know them by word of mouth. So I think these buildings, they teach us a lot of urban harmony, and they are important to preserve because they tell the legacy of the city, and they build on the territorial story of the whole city. So they teach us a lesson, but also it's challenging for us to preserve. And also to repurpose. It's always a question, what can you do with the building? So to preserve it, do you want to preserve as is? This is I think the continuous debate also in Tunisia and maybe elsewhere. Do you preserve it as is, or do you expand it so that it's economically viable? So this is an ongoing question. That's it from my side.
Great, thank you. That's a great start. Ala, please.
Thank you, Daniel, again for inviting me. It's such an honor to be in this panel. The case of Cairo, where I'm actually presenting, I'm actually not in Cairo, but I'm presenting Cairo at the moment, is in fact a case where we can actually challenge a bit this term of colonial when we talk about built heritage. This is in fact a case where a city that was basically the center of caravans passing through here and there, bringing in, merging together many architectural and urban forms, which becomes the norm of the city. So it's basically an accumulative layers of transformations from a mode to another, which makes it quite difficult to, in fact, determine dates. And that was, in fact, a debatable when we showed that map and we discussed it earlier before we got to the audience, when exactly we should determine colonialism. Well, colonial in a political point of view, that can be, in fact, written. But however, when we talk about socio-cultural connectivity, I think in the case of Cairo, challenge a bit that term and makes it a bit difficult to grasp or understand for Cairene or for even the users of the city. However, having said that, and I'm giving you another glimpse on how the issue of colonialism in the city of Cairo can be a bit difficult to understand, is the fact that all of our remarkable built heritage of the 19th and early 20th century are registered for protection under the Ministry of Culture. Whereas most of the other previous eras, we're talking about from the 9th century on, up until the 19th century are registered as monuments under the Ministry of Antiquities. So it looks to me here that the dichotomy is a bit exaggerated when you look at our roots as being museified, whereas that what we call or so-called colonial is protection of culture matter. So this is again the dichotomy that I'm trying to raise in general in Cairo, but then I have a very specific also personal case where I am actually based in Cairo in a 17th century building built in a Mamluk style, but then remodeled heavily under Muhammad Ali's nephew, bringing in Baroque style. And then we want to make it modern or contemporary. So basically, here sets the whole issue, whether we are so still attached to it is our roots, or we're just living the moment, I would say, whether it is colonial or whatever. So it looks to me that Egyptians tend to live the moment, and they feel that all those accumulative layers are there as bases, but never really felt that this is colonial. But also another thing to add here is the fact that what the so-called colonial architecture is still considered a matter of the elite, whereas when we talk about the traditional setting, is more of the norm, the people. So again, but they coexist and they co-live in the city, and I think the argument I'm just trying to make here is that colonialism in a city of like Cairo, it's a bit of a phenomenon that doesn't exist.
Great, thank you so much. That gives us a lot to think about. The difference in designation and the language, of course, is complicated. So let's go ahead and hear from Labib, please. Thanks.
Hello, thank you very much, Daniel. It's really a pleasure to be here among you and also to learn a lot from the case of Tunisia and Cairo as well. Yeah, I mean, already Layla they point out very important point that I see a lot of common things and a lot of crossings, let's say. So in the case of Casablanca, I don't want just to talk about Casablanca. Actually, I can talk about Morocco in a way because the organization that we just launched in 2016, it's about the preservation of the heritage of the post-colonial period in Morocco. But I have been familiar with another association that is called Casa Memoire, which is like the memory of Casablanca, and that association is the oldest association in Morocco for the preservation of, it started as a colonial architecture preservation. So 1995, at that time, whenever you go to authorities and talk about a colonial building, when you talk about Art Deco, for example, and Casablanca, by the way, has one of the largest collection of Art Deco architecture in one city. But still, when you go to authorities, they're like, oh no, man, come on, this is like really colonial. We don't really care about it and so on. This used to be really the case. Today, there is a quite interesting shift because it's been 20 years that the association was really working hard, trying to, let's say, do awareness. And it's not easy because even the people using these spaces, it is a very intricate kind of relationship between these areas. And this, of course, by growing up in a bit, in a way, for me, because when I joined this association, I was still a student in the first year. And for me, the only thing that brought my attention to it is the fact that I was quite struck with the fact that when I go to public buildings, there was like this Heritage Day tour, and there were only French people explaining about this building. And I was like, come on, I mean, this is my country, this is my city. And here I come with a French guy telling me the story of this building. So I should be the first one to learn about it, right? So this is how I started. And growing up in architecture, like doing architecture degree and so on and so on, then I learned actually that I was very harsh in a way. I said, no, these guys don't understand anything about heritage when someone is like rejecting this architecture. But then you can link it, of course, to the colonial heritage, because Moroccans were not allowed into this, what they call the European city, which is today the colonial heritage. So in a way, they were always rejected. And at some point, they had to accept it and take it as its own. And this take a lot of time. So today, it is impossible to kind of just go in Casablanca, especially in Casablanca, just demolish a nautical building. Because even if it's not preserved, but the authorities are really, they know now the value of it and they can't go above it. One last word before I close my introduction is there is a quite interesting thing happening in Morocco now. There is this acceptance kind of the colonial heritage as it is our heritage now, so we should preserve it and we should show it because it is trace of history. But there is kind of a rejection of not a rejection, but no acknowledgement to the post-colonial modern heritage, because actually it's not that old. So when you go and try to preserve it, then no, come on, this is like the 70s, so it's not really that old. And that brings up, of course, many other questions on what to preserve and what not to preserve. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. That's very helpful. There's a lot there as well. I think it seems to me that there's a lot coming out here about the language and about the definitions and about specific classification of particular buildings, what constitutes heritage based on age, based on function, and sort of how it can be reinterpreted. But I'm just sort of wondering if any of you would like to respond or ask each other, sort of thinking about what you just heard. Is there anything that jumps out immediately that might be worth discussing? Yeah, my limited experience in working on material in Tunisia, it sort of reminds me a little bit about it's similar, I think, to what Labib is saying about Morocco, in the sense that the Association for the Protection of the Medina, the ASM in Tunis, has in recent decades started working on and addressing, quote, modern or colonial era buildings. So an organization that was established to preserve the more traditional Medina architecture, pre-colonial architecture, has started embracing and working on very effectively buildings that are actually not in the Medina, that are actually outside that boundary. And I think it's interesting that it's not a separate organization like Casa Memoire that is doing that, but rather the city's primary heritage conservation organization has really been embracing both sides of that chronological divide. And I wonder if there are other organizations that do that, or is it really just kind of a separate compartmentalized group or approach? Seems like maybe that. Go ahead.
If I may comment on what you just said, Daniel, is again coming back to that issue of whether colonial is a matter of culture or a matter of a museum object in the case of Cairo. And thinking about those associations, which are basically associations of civil society, not, I mean, semi-governmental in a way, which means that it comes from the people to the city, to the old city, which is totally different in the case of Cairo, where most of the city of Cairo, the historic city of Cairo, is what we call Islamic Cairo or historic Cairo, is only based on musification or making those buildings monuments other than living city. So again, it looks to me that here we're talking about two different cases, whether the Tunisian and Moroccan case and the Cairene case. I'm not sure if I'm making sense.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, go ahead, Leila. I see your.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what I heard from Ala just now. The word musification, in my mind, always makes a public building, because I think if private and you're restoring, then you need to need to think of the financial sustainability of the restoration. And I think that this is a big challenge in Tunisia, because the public buildings, sometimes it's relatively easy to get funding to restore a historical building, a palace or a madrasa or a shrine. But then often there's no budget for maintenance. And because it's a government building, then making money is not part of the equation. It's like a never-ending cycle of looking for money to restore. This is where I'm an advocate for private-public partnerships, because I think if we can find a solution where it stays as a government building, but then there's sort of a business model that helps the building sustain itself, but and a offers a specific function to the community or to the city. But private-public partnership process is extremely complicated in Tunisia, and even though both private and public feel that it could be a very good solution.
If I may respond also to what you just said, Laila, is the fact that in our historic cities, both in Tunisia, Morocco, and in Cairo as well, the components or the built component of the urban fabric are a bit are actually a bit relying to each other. So even if it is a hara, a neighborhood, or maybe also the system of awqaf, which made those components related to each other also on a legal level as well. Whereas in what we call the colonial part of the city, things were a bit different. It was a bit ready for legal intervention, because it goes with the modern legal system, that was introduced to all of our countries in the late 19th century. So and this made the cases of the colonial remains, or what Daniel called it, artifacts, a bit easy to tackle, rather than all of these Islamic buildings, which are so intricately related on an urban socio-economic level, that made it a bit difficult to approach. And if so, you need to, again, musify them, or maybe make them public or state properties, so that you can apply your own mandates.
Yeah, you remind me, sorry. Go ahead, Lahbib. Sorry.
Okay. I turned off the camera, so sorry, because I thought maybe it's better for the connection, so I don't lose you. I think it's very important. I just want to go back to this idea of what to call heritage and what to not call heritage, because in the case of Casablanca is you have, of course, as I told you, this rejection of the Art Deco at some point, because it was not something that looks Moroccan in a way. But then at the same time, it was a completely acceptance, even like proudly talking about what it used to be the town for the indigenous, which is actually also built in the colonial period. But since it was built in a very Islamic Arabisance architecture, and this, of course, talking about post-colonial studies. Someone like Edward Said talked about this idea of separation, even in terms of styles. So Orients are against, Orients means tradition, means old stuff. And then, of course, modern means European, means. So even in the language today, when you talk about modern, you never use modern Moroccan heritage. You just use modern heritage in Morocco. For me, this also is kind of interesting to see how the shift is done. So in terms of awareness, what we do as associations today is to go a bit deeper than just like talk about heritage like that, because people, they have to understand that, of course, today we need to save it, not because actually it's beautiful, or because it's we need to save it because it's also a trace of our own history. it's there. I mean, it's been there. Of course, it could be a violent history, it could be a beautiful history, but it is history, and this is important to have it. Those layers in the city are very important. And for me, it's also very important as the role of associations. In the case of Morocco, they have they have quite a large space to do many things. And one thing that can show, and because I know that Ala is also working a lot with the UNESCO, in Casa Memoir, for example, it was the first association in Morocco to be accredited as an official partner in Morocco as an association. Because Casa Memoir also, normally, when you want to get a city to be in the UNESCO Heritage List, it's done by the state, right? It's done by the city. But this is very unique because in Casablanca, the power of the association and all the movements, it makes that Casa Memoir at some point took the project as its own baby and even worked in it and made the whole team, made the whole effort, and even finished doing the dossier within the association, working with many architects and many experts all over the world. So that's the role of association. Unfortunately, there are many energies like that.
I wanted to add something to what Ala was saying about the legal registration of the colonial properties. It's true, Ala, there's less challenges. The big problem we have in Tunisia in the colonial part of colonial city of Tunis is what we call أملاك الأجانب. They are buildings that were owned by foreigners during the occupation. And many of them, the owners are not here anymore, and the buildings are kind of don't have an owner. And these cause a big problem because, I mean, you can't buy them, you can't sell them. They're kind of inhabited, they need maintenance. At one point, the parliament was trying to pass a law to demolish them all, and then civil society stopped that. So it's an ongoing solution finding process.
If you allow me, Layla, also to go back to what Lahbib just said, and referring to the term of heritage, whether colonial remains can be actually felt as a heritage. Well, to me, heritage has to be a matter of association, a human being association to an object, you know. So it's a matter of inheriting a valuable object, basically. And if you don't feel that kind of inheritance, heritage doesn't exist, you know. So preserving it only as a layer to witness a historical event or so, it's a bit of a pressure on future generations in order to upkeep those layers without actual meanings, you know. So if we're talking about a community-based preservation formula, I think heritage needs to be defined as a personal matter, as a personal attachment, so that colonialism, if we're talking about art, architecture, and urban fabric, needs to dissolve a bit in order to be considered part of what we inherit, really, you know. And in fact, it shows quite well, you know, in all of our modern developments within the city of Cairo or the outskirts of the city. It all mimics colonial architecture, basically. So apparently there is a love for that, you know. So, whether it is a beautiful expression or not, that's something debatable. That's not my subject. But it looks to me that the attachment, at least for the Cairene, is more towards colonialism rather than it is for traditional architecture.
That's a great point. And I think, of course, we're hearing from about three different national contexts. If we were speaking to someone from Algeria, or perhaps to someone from India, or anywhere else, Vietnam, for example, we might be getting a different perspective. So just to be clear, of course, we're speaking about the context in which you are all working, but a lot of these issues, of course, are global in their application, and of course the perspective may be different there. So I don't want anyone to think that we're suggesting that these are the sort of universal approaches, but we've got, I think, a nice array of them here. Someone had mentioned before, maybe it was you, Ala, the association with the elites, this idea that the modern material is regarded sort of as an elite subject that is of more interest to social, political, or cultural elites today. I wonder if the others might speak a bit about that, and if there are issues like that that you encounter in the work that you all do.
Well, I mean, heritage in general and heritage preservation and cultural heritage in Tunisia was, before the revolution, the affair of the government. And yes, the academia. But I think the liberation of the civil society movements in post-revolution Tunisia, yes, there's a lot of activism and a lot of appropriation of heritage. And in fact, and I think it's a positive movement. There are a lot of young people starting NGOs and working on different things, telling stories and digging into heritage. I mean, digging into history, trying to understand the meanings of buildings and different uses, and trying to document. And I still think there's a lot to do, but at least it has been liberated. There's more people that are part of the mission of preserving all parts of heritage. And in fact, it's thanks to this probably that we were able to protect what is left of colonial heritage, maybe.
If I also want to respond about this elite issue, Daniel, there are actually a couple of things. The Ministry of Culture currently is actually launching a program to all of those 3,000 colonial buildings that they have registered for protection under its NUH, or National Organization for Urban Harmony. This program is called Asha Huna, or lived where somebody lived in. So basically, most of these figures are the elite of the elites, basically. So whether an artist, a great politician, an economist, you name it, actors, and so on and so forth. So apparently it disassociates all of the historic city, or the Islamic part of the city, from all these figures, which used to be also, thinkers, philosophers, traders. Some were from Morocco's background, others from Tunisia's background, the mausoleums, as if we are celebrating only that layer, of elite of the late 19th and early 20th century, and we should then leave the others only to be found in textbooks or books, not in the urban fabric itself. So this is, to me, a manifestation of that elite thinking, or associate colonial remains with elite of the city. So that came to my mind when you just mentioned elite, Daniel.
Sure, and I think it's a fair point to say that cultural heritage preservation is expensive, and it is a luxury. It is wonderful to be able to do this. It is not at the forefront of everyone's thinking all of the time. Many people have very important things to worry about on their day-to-day life, and so inevitably this type of thinking and activity is going to be something that is not necessarily widely popular or a part of everyone's life, although that could change. I mean, and I think there are examples, as Leila points out, that, you know, society is shifting a bit and it's becoming more recognized as an integral part of the sort of actual day-to-day life of a city and of a country. But I wonder a little bit about how the different contexts in which you all are working respond to this material when one thinks about the sort of complexities of colonialism. So yes, Art Deco is beautiful. I think Art Deco is a lovely style. I enjoy Art Deco buildings aesthetically. But, you know, this idea that, and the fact that these buildings were built largely by European audiences for European audiences, in excluding Moroccans, Tunisians, Egyptians, and others. I mean, how is that issue addressed? How does that come up in the work that you do with more modern material? Is there rejection? Do people say things like, this building is a colonial building, it is French, or it is British, or whatever, and therefore it should not be taking our time? I mean, I wonder if how much you encounter that, and what are some of the conversations about those perspectives that you hear?
Um, if I may, I think it's a historical conversation, and it's a long one going on until today. As I told you, the first organizations were thinking about, yes, we should preserve the buildings built in Morocco. The context is in the 80s, there were many buildings demolished, and then others taking place, either from the government itself or either from real estate, people just buying and just building whatever they can or whatever they want on site. And so even the people working for those associations, they were always labeled as the protectors of colonialism or as the protectors of France, you know? Um, and then I found it very interesting. I think one of the solutions in a way to at least bring the discussion on a very interesting plate and then talk about it. And because it's a complex situation, um, is actually to build kind of a surface, a platform to it. And the platform for Casablanca was Heritage Days. So the Heritage Days is basically 3 days. All the buildings are open for public. People go, do tours and stuff. And then one of the tools was actually to explain how is those buildings are interesting in terms of architecture, in terms of heritage, and so on and so on. And this actually shifted the role. As I told you, today it is inconceivable that you go to the municipality or the mayor house in Casablanca and say, you know what, this building of the 20th century, like early 20th century, we want to demolish it and bring a hotel because we want to invest. This is now behind us. It was totally true, just like 10 years ago. In fact, now in Casablanca, they just registered a huge list of buildings into the national heritage. For us, it's different from Egypt. As Ala, I just like learned from Ala that actually you have a separation between old, let's say, historical buildings as they are called antique, and modern heritage as they are actually managed, let's say, by the cultural institutions or the Ministry of Culture. In Morocco, the Ministry of Culture is actually taking everything on its managing, and this is one of the, because we talk a lot about it, how the protectorate, not colonial, and a lot of people even they really express that no, we were not colonized, we're just in the protectorate. But of course, I mean, when you study, it's actually the same thing. But anyways, Lyoté, who was the first Résident Général in Morocco, did this interesting law that until today it's working, which is preserving the heritage. And he was the one who introduced a law on how you can make a building and list a building. And this is ongoing until today because basically anyone can go make a folder and go to the Ministry of Culture and put a folder and say, I want to preserve this building because it's my ownership or because I see it interestedly. And then there is a commission and so on, and then they can list it. So this I found something that actually saving so the conversation is more going on what to preserve and what not to preserve rather than actually who will be doing that preservation work.
Well, I would like, in fact, to raise a point that it looks to me a bit of a question mark rather than it is an argument. Well, it looks to me that from both of our Tunisian and Moroccan colleagues is that colonialism is associated with a building style, such as Art Nouveau, for example, in the case of Casablanca. As you know, we have seen great architects, pioneers of architecture coming in, building in Egypt, for example, such as Auguste Perret, Frank Lloyd Wright, building structures which are so blending into the local culture, and in fact, those people were so influenced by the local architecture to the degree that, for example, Auguste Perret brings his tapered columns back to France as if it is an expression of a bush of palm trees, that he saw in south of Egypt. So what is colonialism exactly? Are we talking about us being colonized or us colonizing other cultures?
In Tunisia, with regards to preservation laws, if we may call it heritage management, we have Code du Patrimoine, which is 30 years old last week. And in fact, it just like Ala said, and I think Lahbib also said, it just makes the Minister of Culture responsible for all tangible, intangible heritage preservation without having the means to implement this big responsibility. And I think with the challenges that we have now in Tunisia, the private sector is doing a lot of work in preserving what can be preserved, but it's quite complex because well, technically and financially, of course, but even licensing, when you ask for a restoration permit, you have to go through 3 entities, and it takes months, years sometimes, and even for to create schools, vocational schools for the techniques of restoration that were lost. These are also initiatives that had been kind of led by civil society or private sector.
So thank you. That raises a great point that I wanted to touch on, is sort of how does the input or the investment from outsiders, whether they're French or Saudi or American or whomever, how does that influence and affect the way the different types of heritage work that you're seeing in these different contexts is being done? I mean, some might argue that there's a sort of external influence that borders on neo-colonialists. Some disagree. It's a hot topic, but who pays for this work and how it's funded, whether it's local, international, private sector versus public sector, is a very important question, I think.
I think it's a very interesting question because I think in the context of Morocco, when you see the associations working on this, many of them have funds coming from Europe and coming from Morocco. And of course, you can also, I mean, I don't say that I can't pick let's say a side. I think it's true. What you say is kind of a new colonialism going on, but it's also at the same time, I see it as for me, and also working in heritage, I see it as a transaction. When actually you have somebody who is interested to save the heritage of what his fellow old architect did. You know, when you have buildings and you have somebody that has all this nostalgia, it's actually, yeah, my father lived in this building and so on and so on. I think heritage is universal in that sense. So someone who lived in an apartment building for like all his life, we have a lot of people were born in Casablanca. They went after the independence, they went back to France, and they coming back again. And in fact, one of the founders of the association Casa Memoire is actually no one. I mean, he's not a founder, but he was the one behind that foundation of Casa Memoire. Is no one is actually Jean-Louis Cohen, the great historian who built this big book on Casablanca. And for him, and he says it clearly many times, he says, when I was coming to Casablanca to work on a book on Casablanca, I saw a lot of buildings being demolished, and I had nothing. I had no power to do anything to actually save it. And so luckily, he found at the same time he found very enthusiastic architects that were at that time junior in a way, who were sharing the same thoughts. And so they created that association. Like Moroccans created them, and they were taking the lead, and they were the one developing many things. But yeah, the spin of it was coming from someone who knew the value of this. So for me, it's more about knowledge, because when you know, then you don't have any frustration. And when you don't know, you still have frustrations of colonialism, of that, no, I don't care about this, and so on, so on. But it's history, and this is what is important to share with people, actually.
Wow. Well, in fact, if I may shift to the case of Cairo and to the total opposite of what Lahbib is just mentioning right now, all of the colonial or the so-called colonial buildings are in fact uh, managed and cared by local either individuals or institutions. You know, I've tried hard while Lahbib was talking to think about a case whereby a foreign institution have helped in preserving or rehabilitating a colonial building, whether even industrial or whatever it is. And I didn't bring up a case. Most of the funding that comes from abroad goes to the historic city of Cairo, or traditional architecture and so on. Which again brings my very own argument that the case of Cairo is a bit different.
Well, and I think Tunis resembles what you have just said, Ala. It's also, I mean, most of the mainly maybe EU money. It's for the historical Medina of Tunis and mostly for public buildings. But if we talk about colonial, it's mainly local impact investors. The good cases that I know of are mainly local impact investors.
And what's make it very much more interesting is the case that the actual government at the moment is really caring about their historic colonial architecture. And I name, for example, the post offices, which have been restored here and there in Egypt, not particularly in Cairo, but elsewhere also in Egypt, in addition to all of the efforts of the Ministry of Communication, turning great architecture of the late 19th, 20th century into a hub of innovation, they call it, sometimes a hub of technology. So there is a tendency to recognize from the local government apparently such historic background.
Great, thanks. I'm just keeping an eye on the Q&A as well, because we've got about another 15 or so minutes left. So I just want to sort of work some of those comments and questions in. So if you have any questions, everyone out there, please feel free to add them to the chat. But one comment here from Michelle that I think is very helpful is regarding sort of who creates the buildings. So yes, I think there is a tendency for one to say, well, the buildings in Morocco were made by the French, but I mean, even in Tunisia, they were made, quote, by the French, but it was primarily Tunisians and Italians who were building those buildings. So that's shorthand for a much more complicated process, which actually impacts and involves local people much more than is often acknowledged. And so I certainly don't mean to minimize that. But the question here, I see looking toward the Casablanca situation for Labib here is that, scholarship by Jean-Louis Cohen and Monique Elleb, of course, suggests that the colonial architecture that we're seeing in Casablanca is actually built not only by the French, but by Moroccan Muslims and Jews and investments from others across the Mediterranean. And is there a sense to which that interconnected process makes modern architecture in Morocco more accessible or more, Moroccan and therefore more meaningful in that context?
I think that the fact that, of course, we acknowledge the fact that it was also Moroccan when it was created, but then one might argue in what context. I mean, Moroccans working and building these buildings, they were making it as labor. And the other people who were investing in it, they were actually working with the French. So after independence, those people, they got stripped out of everything they had because they were working with in between bracket between the traitors, they were traitors, and so they were actually investing and so on against their own country in a way. So, and this is a very complex situation. That's why I'm saying what I have been actually what I learned from the associative work is that you have to understand to whom you are talking. It's very important that the way you're talking about heritage is really not a general thing. You should really know with whom you're talking, because then you can know on what background you can talk. Because if I start coming and talking about colonialism and how it's like, if I start bringing in Fanon and so on and so on, of course, I mean, everyone would hate would hate the buildings, you know what I mean? But you have to take some of the recul, let's say, to understand things. And I can link it also to the other first comment I had, which is by Alexis Clark, who asked me what's the difference between modern heritage in Morocco and modern Moroccan heritage. For me, when we say modern heritage in Morocco, it means that actually Morocco, it was brought to him to Morocco modernity. Modernism is not in Morocco, so it was brought by colonialism, right? But when we say modern Moroccan heritage, then for me, because Morocco was all the time modern in the way doing architecture. If we speak about modern that as being contemporary, as being always ahead of time and being also connected to the whole world. I see also Qasbas from 1,500 years as modern. They were modern in that time. You know what I mean? So for me, I only see modern heritage, modern Moroccan heritage. For me, it means that actually I'm speaking about a period. I'm speaking about modern as a movement of architecture. We also have brutalism in Morocco. So then I call it brutalist Moroccan heritage. I don't call it brutalist architecture in Morocco, because here again, Moroccan architects were building it and were building it by the money of clients who are Moroccan, and they were building it for Moroccan. And just maybe to finish, I had this little story I want to share with you. In Morocco, there is a very important architect who worked in the 60s with another architect. Like one is French and the other is Moroccan. And in between brackets, that French, his name is Patrice de Mazières, and he's a third generation architect in Morocco. So his grandfather worked in the 20s, and his father worked in the 40s, and he worked in independence Morocco, right? And he worked in collaboration with a Moroccan architect. His name is Abdeslam Farawi. So he told me, once I asked him, I was like, wow, this is amazing collection of buildings you have been built. It's brutalist architecture and so on. And he actually was upset with me because he told me, no, it's not brutalist, it's contemporary architecture. And so here, when I understood that architecture, Moroccan architects also at that time, they saw architecture as their peers all over the world were doing. So modernity is not imported. Modernity is embedded in Morocco, as it is embedded in Algeria, as it is embedded in Cairo, as it is embedded in all these former colonies.
Great. Thank you. I think that's helpful. There's another comment here that I think is useful. We touched on the subject, this idea that defining and preserving architecture as heritage because it bears witness to history raises concerns potentially about the entire city becoming a preserved sort of museum, if you will, and that may suffocate the natural development of a place. And to what degree is that a concern or a consideration that we might be thinking about?
I have a reflection on that very point.
Please.
Since I've been questioning that about colonialism in general, but actually I'll come back to it once more if we're talking about heritage conservation. It looks to me that adopting heritage conservation principles and approaches of the West, that was what was really colonized the local culture. So basically that those museum approaches which were imported to dissolve those connectivities between the components of the urban fabric and to designate an element or two as being a monument and disassociate those components from each other, that was really made the greatest impact from a colonial point of view. So it was more of a logistic colonialism towards heritage rather than it is of a style or an expression, an aesthetic expression. So to me, it does exist, if we're talking about the secularism that happened in the late 19th century and the detaching that kind of community association with the urban fabric and dissolving it gradually to the degree that, as you just said right now, that conservation or heritage conservation might be a subject of musification.
This brings up, I think, the big issue of tourism, which is a part of this discussion, I think, because so often a lot of the conservation work that is done with an eye towards tourists, for better or worse. Of course, it's a complicated situation. And I'm just wondering, I know, of course, Leila, you welcome visitors frequently to Tunis, and I'm wondering sort of what degree you think this type of heritage can be used as a way, both in the quote traditional sense, but in the more modern material, can be used as a way to foster productive engagements between outsiders and local people.
Yes, if it's cultural tourism in general, it's an amazing opportunity for cultural exchange and cultural understanding. But in our case, it's also, we try to it's not just through the building, but also through the cultural experience itself within the city, within the community, and activities with the souks, with the artisans, with the different parts of the city. And we have, in fact, we have designed a tour, a Tunis city tour with which points out the different architectures. It encourages people to look up when they pass by a building to see that this is Italian, this is Maltese, this is French, this is Ottoman, this is Andalusi, and I think this shows how the city has the urban empathy of the city, how the city has capitalized on its various layers to create the story that we're trying to share with our guests. And I think this also, it sounds like it's important for our guests, but it's also important for our team and our community, because they themselves don't see it in the same way, don't see it as important. And then when they see it in you know, how other people perceive it and how other people understand the magic of having all these layers sitting together in one city. And I think this is even more important for the local community, for the local youth, to start appreciating the wealth of their city.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I think it is important to remember that tourism can play a role in both directions. It's not just providing something for outsiders to consume, but it can also be a tool for self-understanding and self-exploration and sort of local, of course, investment and participation. There's a comment here from Kivanch about other frameworks for thinking about this shared architectural heritage across North Africa, such as the Mediterranean. Thinking about this and understanding these buildings perhaps through the concept of Mediterranean architecture rather than colonial architecture or modern architecture. Of course, that's not a perfect solution either, but does that have any resonance or mean something to any of you, perhaps?
Well, to me, at least from a viewpoint of an Alexandrine myself, coming from the city of Alexandria, yes, of course, it is a resonance. We grew in a city where we co-lived with all of our colleagues from Greece, Italy, and so on. And that cosmopolitan feeling made us associated with the sea, basically, and beyond it as well. So, and again, it fuses a lot this anxiousness between built styles, you know. So to me, I've been to a school run by Franciscans, and you know, it was quite an easy way to go through education, basically. And because Alexandria was such a cosmopolitan city, to the degree that we're all feeling in such a unity, and there was no really difference between you know, sects or elites and so on and so forth. So yes, it does have a resonance that the Mediterranean, even from the time of the Romans, have gathered us all, you know, whether in Tunisia, Libya, Morocco, and it looks to me that we have a common heritage anyways. So if we dig a bit deep, it's there. It's just to bring it up to the surface and start to pick up those attributes that made us all appreciating it.
Thanks. Let me just check the questions, make sure. Yeah, I think some other comments are sort of acknowledging the fact that with time, the direct association with colonialism and the many problems that come with that sort of perhaps recedes a bit, and maybe the aesthetic qualities, the infrastructural or the sort of engineering qualities of some of these buildings become more recognized as noteworthy and worthy of protection, and therefore that changes the way that one perhaps values the buildings, which I think is a fair point. And there's another comment thinking a little bit about, you know, this is from Fatma here, in cases where colonial monuments have not proven to be of general interest or in poor condition, should we consider modifying and enhancing these structures using national expertise rather than continuing to preserve monuments that have little added value? How can such an approach reflect the experience of colonized societies and potentially serve as a mirror for their history and cultural evolution? I think that's a great question. I mean, thinking about how can preservation be made to serve the people in their current needs as opposed to monumentalizing a structure. Any quick thought on that point?
If I might jump on this, I think it is very important that the whole work that we do, at least in Morocco, is this kind of not musifying the city. It's not we don't want to have buildings that are just like, yeah, protected, but still not, then there's nothing going on in them and so on. So this speaks a lot because we have I have many connections also with the local authorities, and they have investors coming, like someone who would come and say, okay, you know, I'm interested in this building and I want to build a hotel that will bring a lot of investment, a lot of things and so on. And so these are real questions. And so that's why I started by saying what to call heritage and what not, but also how to preserve. And there's not only one solution. It's not black and white. I mean, preserving could be also in many ways dealing on how the building it is, the value of it, and also it's a negotiation system. It's not a black and white. And I think we should acknowledge the fact that we don't want to fix the city in one poster and just like keep it for tourists. This is not the aim, I think, of preservation of heritage. The aim is to go in and then you find a building that used to be apartment, being a co-working space, or being a museum, or being a cultural center, or even being also still an apartment space. But conservation works a lot in this way of negotiation, not just like this is how it does and this is it's not. So for me, this is how I see things, I think.
We can't hear you, Daniel.
Thank you. Sorry. I hate to cut off the conversation, but it is 1:15. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us. This, I think, was a really helpful look at how you are all thinking about things and working with things. And it's just the beginning of a longer conversation. You know, I think there's much more that can be said, and I wish we could stay all afternoon, but I want to respect everyone's busy days. So thank you on behalf of the journal, on behalf of the International Journal of Islamic Architecture, for joining us. I've put the link there in the chat to the journal. So again, if anybody is interested, please check that out and let us know if you're writing and researching on these topics. We'd love to hear from you. And this it has been recorded. We will upload this and share this. And as I mentioned, I believe I mentioned in the beginning, we will write this up and it will feature in an upcoming issue of the journal. So people can read more and continue the conversation. So this has been our 4th Dialogues, and I hope it's been useful. And it's been pleasant for me. I've really learned quite a lot. So thank you all. Best wishes from Philadelphia. Panelists, if you'd like to stick around for a minute, we can chat. But otherwise, take care, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you.